The days and weeks that have passed have been extraordinarily complex and difficult and painful. And it has left so many of us with so many questions in our minds, so much anguish. And I have to say from the outset, as a white Jewish man in 2020, thinking back over my life in the context of Jewish history, there is a deep resonance with the experience of oppression, the experience of being vulnerable to violence with no recourse. We are reminded just how overwhelming the world can be. And because we have this history, because in our very roots is the daily reminder through our liturgy of oppression and slavery, the experiences of our ancestors ring so loudly and clearly that as we watch what has just been going on, we feel deeply moved. And I think more than moved, we feel bruised, offended. One of the hard things for Jewish people to do, and maybe I'll just do this in first person. One of the hard things for me to acknowledge is that while I feel the sense of being an other in America, my white skin is a ticket of admission to many places and to many experiences that are denied to Black men of my age and younger, to Black women and children. And there's a part of me that wants to say, well, but I'm Jewish, so I'm not quite like those other people. But, you know, it's a rather specious argument at this stage in our lifetime in America, despite the rise of anti-Semitism. The fact is that we have an extraordinarily large number of privileges afforded to us. And which means really for me as a Jew and for me as a rabbi, that we then become all the more responsible to be responsive, to listen, to learn, and to act. That's what really this is about this evening. I want to, again, just always wanting to be utterly transparent. When we chose this date and this topic, we really were rushing to do it because it was so urgent, and it is. And I remember thinking, okay, so we're going to have to do a whole variety of this, and who should I talk to? And I called up Neil Jacobs, who in the 3 Point Foundation has worked with a huge number of Black children and adults and Black leaders in the Boston area and probably beyond. And when I called and asked for some suggestions, like who can we talk to? Who can we learn from? Who can be our rabbis for this gathering? He called me back like in 20 minutes and gave me the names of the men we're going to be hearing from today. And as you will hear, these are extraordinary men who, in part of their work, have been about connecting with the white community to help us understand what this partnership needs to be about. Because I really do think it's all about partnership. So our tradition calls us unambiguously to be present in the world, performing deeds of loving kindness and truth. And we cannot back away from that. So tonight, we'll learn together. We will hear three men share their unique experiences and their sense of what happens next. Hopefully also giving us a sense of where we go from here, the kind of partnership we can create, the kind of things we need to learn. Throughout the evening, any questions that you have, I'd appreciate it if you went to the chat room and sent your questions. Becky will pick them up and then will give them to us later on in the evening. We'll answer as many as we can. One other note about that. There's a remarkable unease that we have, many of us have, when we have a conversation about race between white people and Black people. It is one of those conversations that for some of you maybe is part of your work, part of your avocation, part of your friendship circle. But for many of us, that's just not the case. And you may have questions that feel embarrassing or simplistic or just things you want to know moving forward. And I do want to reassure you that our speakers, I'm sure they have heard virtually every configuration of every question that you might have. But please, from your heart and with the goal of learning and respect, I would ask you not to be afraid to bring up the questions that you might have, questions of the heart, of the mind, of the soul. So thank you for gathering to be with us this evening to begin from the heart of our congregation, work that is uniquely ours as Temple Beth Avodah. And I appreciate you all so much. Neil, if you would please introduce our guest tonight.
It'd be my honor and privilege. To pick up on what Rabbi Stern was saying, all three of these individuals, Darnell Williams, Keith McDermott, and A.K. Ikwuakor, have shown enormous patience and understanding with me over the last 8 years, helping me understand how to help in communities of color with young people who are economically disadvantaged. So they're perfect speakers for us. They have been my mentors, my friends, my advisors. They're people of great wisdom. Darnell, who some of you know, I heard Lisa speaking up, is recently retired as the president of the Urban League, which is located in Roxbury. Darnell has spent the majority of his adult life in Boston, building bridges between economic leaders of the city, of Eastern Massachusetts, and the Black community and the Latinx community, trying to help members of that community develop the skills they need to get jobs, and then to make the connections with the companies in Boston and in Eastern Massachusetts so that individuals can transform their lives. He's a very well-known person in the city and is regarded as a true leader of community of color in Boston. Keith McDermott, who's wearing the 3-point logo, is which I always appreciate, was the director for 20 years of the Reggie Lewis Center, which is a gem of an athletic facility located in Roxbury. It's mostly a track and field facility with some basketball thrown in, but Keith used it as a vehicle to develop programming for the community, the elder citizens who live around the Reggie Lewis Center, young people who live in Roxbury and Dorchester and Mattapan, have had their lives enriched by Keith's work and his dedication to the community. Keith was the first person to give me a chance and to trust me when I showed up 8 years ago and said I wanted to do after school programming. I told him I had no money to do it except my own, and could he give me a break on rent using the Reggie Lewis Center? And his response was, if you're helping kids from our community, I'm not going to charge you anything. And the one thing I will warn you about Keith and Darnell is they are cutthroat golfers. And if you go with them to Franklin Park, they will take your money without any conscience whatsoever. So be careful with, you have to play golf with these guys. The third speaker, who at this point, and I'm saying this for Becky, is locked out and says he can't get in on my text, so we can send him an invitation, AK Ikwuakor. If AK manages to get on with us, AK is in his mid-30s. I met him through a friend, through 3 Point, and he was doing a program called Empower to Play in Haiti with trying to empower young Haitian boys and girls in their communities and improve their educational prospects in Haiti. He made a tremendous impression on me through his work, and we've continued to work together. He was a social entrepreneur. He's now an entrepreneur and a former professional athlete who consults with a number of companies like Google and WeWork to work on communications and team building at those companies. We'll try to get him into the conversation, but I wanted to introduce him at this point in case we're successful, because I assume we'll be successful in doing that. I've asked through the rabbi, transferred the rabbi's message to Keith and to Darnell and to AK, that it's perplexing, difficult, awkward to know what to do, how to be an ally. It's not something that is easily done. And that I thought the most helpful thing, and the rabbi suggested to me to ask them, would be to talk about their own experiences, to talk about the history that we're dealing with, and to talk about what can folks like us do and how do we do it? How can we actually make change and not just talk about change? So I'm going to stop there. We have no particular order, but since we don't have AK and I'm just going to go alphabetically by first name, Darnell, you want to start up and take over?
Sure, Neil. I'm happy to. Let me start. I did receive from Rabbi a timing thing, so I want to start my own stopwatch because sometimes I can get long-winded and I want to stay within the confines of that. But Rabbi Stern, I want to thank you officially in your capacity, Temple Beth Avodah, and I want to reach out and say thank you to Becky and to Eileen for help coordinating all of this, and for Neil for that introduction, and for your friendship and stewardship in terms of the work. I'm particularly pleased that I'm going to be with AK and with Keith. Keith McDermott is not only a dear friend, but a gentleman. And so I'm particularly honored that we will be able to join the congregants of Temple of Beth Avodah to have this, what I call, very strident conversation. So I want it to be authentic. I want it to be real. I want it to be personal. I want it to be full of passion about where we are and particularly how we got here. And if I were to start, I would probably say this topic about racism and social justice is not new to the Jewish community, as Rabbi stated in his opening comments. And Black people throughout our history have always had a fondness of recognizing the parallel between what the children of Israel went through when they were in bondage in Egypt and the 400 years of slavery that we experience here. And one of the phrases I always use is that Moses had his hand full trying to getting the children of Israel out of Egypt, and it took him 40 to 80 years to realize, how do I get Egypt out of the heads of children of Israel? Because slavery can have its, what do you call, vestiges in our spirit and our attitudes. And if I parallel to Black people, the vestiges of slavery and all the things that we've gone through are still plaguing us today. And so I believe in August of 2019, I was fortunate enough to work with the editors over at the Boston Herald. And in my humble opinion, that article really was a prediction of what we're going through now. And so I will use just a few of the phrases of what I wrote in that piece that really will set the stage, and then I will transition to maybe 2 or 3 items, because I don't want to dominate. I want to leave some room for Keith and AK to offer some comments. But let me suffice it to say is that as a Black man, as an African American, we have often had to carve out a lifestyle which what was left over in spaces that was deemed for Black people. And so therefore you would not be perceived as this uppity Black, or you didn't know your place. We all can have stories that when either our children or ourselves have been stopped by police officers who were not kind in their pursuit to us, talked to us like we were not citizens, we were second-class citizens. So I got 1,000 stories in the Naked City in that particular area. But I want to be a little bit more thoughtful and reflective that I'm sitting here tonight not as a bitter Black man, not as an angry Black man, but yet I can go there. And I like to use a phrase, if I need to go boo-boo snap on you, I will. But I use that on special occasions. And so what I want to do is to talk about, when we think about maybe 3 things that I think really speak to Black people in America, and then I'll bring it forward. When I think about the 11 states that succeeded from the Union because of slavery, America was in a very tense situation that they were trying to determine as we expanded west, whether it was Missouri Compromise or whatever, would we have slavery beyond that particular parallel. And the southern states withdrew and created the Confederate States based upon their lifestyle, free labor, et cetera, et cetera. And the horror stories behind all of that is still relevant and fresh within our spirit and in our DNA, that they withdrew from the Union in order to perpetuate slavery. And then the Union ended up winning this civil battle we call the Civil War. And I think somewhere in the neighborhood around 620,000 on both sides of the battle died out of 2.3 million Americans that fought 620,000 of them died. And I'm grateful that the Union prevailed because we wanted to do some things differently. There was a different vision for America. And after the Civil War, that Reconstruction period where we saw African Americans elected both to the House and to the US Senate. And in that 12-year period that's called the Reconstruction period, they passed 3 bills that were very instrumental and still plaguing us today. The 13th Amendment was the abolishment of slavery. The 14th Amendment was dealing with citizenship, and the 15th Amendment was the right to vote. Now, why do I bring those up, and how does that relate today? Because when we think about the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court wrote that blacks had no right in the Constitution, and they had no standing as a citizen of the United States. So that 13th Amendment was very, very critical to establish us as United States citizens. The 14th Amendment, I'm sorry, the 13th Amendment was the abolishment of slavery. The 14th Amendment was citizenship. The 15th Amendment was to give us the right to vote, because there was these cute little phrases that if you can vote if your grandfather voted, or they have poll taxes or literacy taxes that will prevent you from voting. Now, I'm gonna bring all of that home in a minute because it's so applicable to where we are today with many of the issues that are still plaguing us. That doesn't mean that I'm minimizing police brutality and the killing of black men. By no way, no means. All I'm trying to do is that I know from my friends in jury, they will tell us that we never want these things to happen again. So we don't know our history and we don't tell our children and each generation of how we got here, then we are doomed to repeat it. So I share this with my brothers and sisters in jury to let them know that we have to know how we got here. That this police brutality just didn't start in 2020. The police brutality and the violence and the intimidation by the white citizens councils or the Ku Klux Klan just didn't start in 2020. We have centuries of these violent intimidation and laws at the federal, state, and local level that have permeated our lifestyle. I go back to what I said at the beginning. So we had to carve out a lifestyle. I think there was one of my books called The Black Book. It says the greatest role ever created by Western society was the role of the Negro. And they used the N-word, and the greatest actor to play that part was the N-word. And so even though it's an offensive statement, but the reality is that it was created because they needed free and continuous supply of free labor. And so they had to reinforce that and use the military and the police in order to effectuate those particular changes. And so over the years, whether it was the chain gangs or prison, pipeline to prison, whether it's redlining, whether it's education in terms of the Brown versus the Board of Education, where people would either close their school systems down rather than to have their children educated with blacks. And so when we see all the cumulative effect of it, it's very, very admirable, both Keith McDermott and myself and others, AK and others, that we don't come out of this process hating America. I don't hate, you can look over my shoulder. I served in the Air Force of the United States. I took an oath to protect the Constitution. I still drive my wife nuts because I fold my socks and underwear and undershirt just like I was still in the military. Drives them nuts. I can't share a closet with them because they're not as neat as a former military person. But my point becomes is that we carve out a lifestyle. We endure daily indignities in order to make sure that we don't just respond to everything because you'll be wore out, worn down, because you will find things to get upset about. And so when I think about the 3 things that I want to add is that when I think about, and Keith, you would appreciate this, I can see right now when Tommy and John Carlos raised their hands up at the 1968 Mexico Olympics in Mexico City. Silent protest, raising their hand, which was a symbol of Black power. They were asked to leave. They got blackballed. They got whole 9 yards. I contrast that with the solemnity of Colin Kaepernick taking a knee as a symbol of protesting police brutality. And another knee that was taken in order to execute injustice and inequality. And so we're at a juncture, at a point of now that we've seen that 8 minutes and 46 seconds and how troubling that we see the life force and the spirit taken out of a human being. What kind of inhumanity, what kind of insensitivity, what kind of a human being would do that to another? And now for the world to see it, all 50 states have protested, because what we've seen is what we should never have seen. But now the videotapes have shown it and people have protested. I will say to you in your hearing tonight, I am not a fan of looting and rioting. I denounce it. I think it's deplorable. It's not an effective means in order to leverage and to negotiate. How do we change policy? How do we make America better, wiser, and stronger? Because we're at the table negotiating specific areas, which I hope that we will get to before the evening is out, that we can make America better. America is nothing more than an experiment. We've had amendments in order to alter the Constitution in order to address the incorrect connotions or the attitudes. We know that federal, state, and local laws were in fact implemented so that we would have not only a second-class citizenship, we would have a first-class one. But yet there were individuals in this country who were dead set on keeping us in bondage, whether it was through sharecropping, Jim Crow, lynching, redlining, discriminatory practices. And so we had to live through all of this. And I know what it was like as a kid when they would say that we could not go to the beach because we would change the color of the water. Or people would come up to us and put their hand in our hair because they were told that we had a tail, that our hair was totally. So I think that when and I've been speaking about 13 minutes, Keith, so I got about 7 minutes to go.
It's good stuff.
And I'm gonna wrap it up in a moment, but I wanted to just make sure that, so when I think about where we are today, America has been divided along these racial lines. I'll give one more example before I close. Affirmative action was created during JFK's administration. It was implemented after the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968. 100 cities across this country were burning in riot because Dr. King was killed. I have one of my buttons right here. I can find it real quick. Now don't turn me into a prolific. Well, it was right here, but I have my 50-year, oh, here it is. I have my 50-year pin celebrating. You might not be able to see that because of the light. When I was in Memphis, going to the Lorraine Hotel and the African American Museum in Memphis, so that I could see and feel firsthand what I did when I was at the tender age of whatever I was in 1968. And I made a commitment that after Dr. King was assassinated, I would dedicate my life to speaking for people who were, in fact, weren't at the table, whose voices were silent. And I've spent 30 years of my life in civil rights as a result of that connection to that particular plea or pledge that I made at a tender age, and never knew it and never recalled it until I went to Memphis and I sat there in that room and I reflected, went to Mason Temple, went to the museum, went to the Lorraine Hotel and saw the vantage point of where the bullet was fired. The assassin bullet may have killed the dreamer, but it did not kill the dream. And so I'm here as a personification of, in fact, someone who grew up in that era when it was like where we had lack of sitting at the counter. lack of interstate travel, lack of access to hospitals. Many of us grew up under the Tuskegee experiment and were afraid to go into hospitals because of the Tuskegee experiment. Still fearful today because we don't know what we're going to get, or Black women being injected and being sterilized without consent or being told. And so we embody that whole message. So when we come to George Floyd, it becomes really personal. It becomes personal because there, by the grace of God, there go I. That could have been my neck. Somebody that looks like me has plans, has children, has aspirations beyond what America has provided. So we have a carved out lifestyle that we call our own that leads us to this place. And so we come to the table with this passion, with an understanding. We're all, Rabbi, deeply moved. We're all deeply hurt. We're deeply angered. And we got to figure out a way, because I'm admiring these young people. I went to 2 of the 3 marches here in Boston. I went to 2 of them. And I walked and I got a chance to see something different that I didn't see at the 25th and the 35th and the 45th and the 50th anniversary on the March on Washington. I saw young white people out there and old white people. I saw stripes of all walks of life. And they were part of this effort. It was very clear in the civil rights movement where the Jewish community and the Black community were hand in glove dealing with the oppression and the injustice. Somehow or another, when Stokely Carmichael, people moved away from that bondship that we had. If we can find a way and use George Floyd's death and legacy in his life in order to restore that to where it really once was, because it was a very powerful relationship. It wasn't based upon Jews, you guys have money and we don't have money. It wasn't about that. It was about you were putting your life on the line. I think Reverend Jeff Reed was from Boston, went down there and died in the civil rights movement, helping people get registered to vote. So I will never lose sight of these individuals who have contributed to where we are. I'm going to stop before my 20 minutes, only because I think you get the gist of where I'm coming from. That I am passionate about this work. I am a student of history, but also I am a child of God. And I believe that forgiveness is the bond of love that will cause us to look beyond what somebody calls me, but what I respond to, but find and trust God that God will get us through it. He will fight the battle for us. Just like he answered the cries and the prayers when you were in bondage, we cried and we prayed that God would free us from the bondage that we had experienced here in America. And our prayers on both sides, Jewish and African Americans, were answered. But yet now we're here again in the same place with the same foe, with the same enemy trying to divide us. And I'm here to let you know I'm committed to what I said at the tender age when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I've come too far from where I started. And we're gonna make America wiser, better, and stronger because we're still living.
Who's next? That was great, Darnell. First of all, I want to thank Rabbi and Neil Jacobs and the rest of the folks listening to me to invite us. Darnell is a deacon, or are you still a deacon, Darnell, or former deacon?
I'm always going to be a deacon.
Always going to be a deacon. And I love hearing Darnell speak because he definitely is an historian. I kind of come at this from a perspective of, I want to share with you, Neil mentioned that I ran the Reggie Lewis Center for 20 years. And my approach to that was we need a collective effort to get things done. So whether it's empowering youth through education, middle-aged folks through economic development, workforce, the senior citizens, helping them to sustain and be healthy. That was my approach. I felt like it was a state institution. It was this resource that we needed to use that to benefit the community in general. My experience, I came from this as a former track athlete. I remember, I know my parents used to tell me a lot about the struggle and how the Jews and the blacks worked together to get a lot of things done and remove a lot of obstacles, helped slavery, about slavery and really freedom for blacks. So I took a very quite keen approach to using athletics and education to really advance the community and break down barriers. The Reggie Lewis Center was about that. My life was about that. But there are a few impactful events that happened in my life. One was meeting Marty Glickman. Marty Glickman was a member of the U.S. Olympic team in 1936, a Jewish sprinter. He was one of the 4 fastest sprinters on that team with Jesse Owens. He was supposed to be on that team. But because of what was going on with Hitler, they decided not to run him on the final in the 4x1 relay, which they ended up setting the world record with Jesse Owens on. So I met him back in the 80s. He was a Syracuse grad, so am I. And I remember talking to him and with a couple of guys. When he walked away, the white guy said he needs to get over it because he was bitter. He said he was bitter that he was not put on that 4x1 relay team in the final. And someone said he needs to get over it. So I said, well, wait, let me understand this. He was one of the 4 fastest guys, which is normal, to be on the 4x1 relay team. And you're telling that he needs to get over it? That just doesn't sound right. He said, well, they had justification. And it kind of puzzled me that just didn't sound right, you know? And so I ran into Marty a few more times and I mentioned it. I didn't tell him who said it, but, you know, and he says, I'm still bitter about it, you know? And, but just the fact that someone would sit back and feel that someone who deserved to be on a team, world record team, deserved to be there, and because of racism or Hitler did not want to see a Jew win a gold medal, that they felt justified that their decision was right. And I just never got over that, you know, and I felt that we needed to work together to get things done. I mean, I see the plight of what's going on these days. And I know for me as an athlete, former athlete, that I got in places and got opportunities just because I could run fast. Okay, and sometimes people don't see me as, they would look at another black guy or someone and say, you know, look at them as suspect. Meanwhile, they would give me access. Same color, same skin color. But I kind of realized that that had to do with the fact that is knowing who you are, knowing people. Wasn't justified, but the fact that you knew somebody, you kind of have a different perspective on that. So my work over the years has been to break down barriers, knowing that you could have mentors. It doesn't have to be white, doesn't have to be the same color. You know, I'll tell you a funny story about Neil Jacobs kind of mentioned it, but I remember meeting Neil when I was at the Reggie Lewis Center, and we used to have events on weekends. I'd go by there. These are all black kids from the community, Latino kids. And I remember walking by on Saturday morning early, and there was this guy in there sitting at a desk like one of the kids doing math with the kids. And he was there in the room. And that really, really impressed me. Because one, Neil, I couldn't do those math because they do different math these days. But Neil Jacobs was sitting in on a Saturday morning doing math with the kids. And I kind of looked, this is what life is all about, right? Helping kids to get along. Because if you plant the seed, my coaches tell me that the brain is a muscle. Okay, so we're all born with all these different muscles and they develop over time. And so Neil was helping this community, giving back. They didn't look at Neil Jacobs as a white man. They looked at someone trying to help him. Neil was there And we had the resources in terms of Reginald Center to place that facility, put it in place to benefit the community. So again, color was not an issue. It was about getting and helping folks, helping kids. And we have the resources, you know, like I said, I've gotten into opportunities just because I could run fast and jump far. And so I felt like I had a responsibility to give back. And when I was in charge of a resource like this, the Reginald Center, it was my responsibility to position that for people to benefit. So now we're here. When Neil asked me to participate in this, I started thinking back to, back in the day when Darnell mentioned Thomas Smith and John Carlos. Had a chance to meet those guys. John Carlos, I actually have his book downstairs signed, that, you know, some of those guys, they couldn't get jobs. One of them was homeless because of what they did. And the Australian sprinter that stood up with him, he basically went back to Australia and couldn't get a job. He struggled because he did that in the fight. So I commend you guys for doing this, for taking the step here now to see what can we do to make things better. Now, as Darnell mentioned earlier, that under no circumstances do I really believe in the rioting, the destruction that's going on. But I think back and say, well, what is it that gets someone to that point? What's it that gets someone to that point that they feel like they have no alternative? They'll put their lives on the line to send a message. So as what can we do collectively to make sure that people have hope? This is the first step that we're doing now. And I am really appreciative of that. I can tell you that I'm not oblivious to racism, but also knew that I have a very different experience growing up. But I also know that we who have the will, the power, the educational resources to make a difference, that we can, and it's no surprise to me that Neil and the rabbi and Deb pulled us together to see how can we do this. Now I have some suggestion. I have a Facebook page, which is very, very, I'm very vocal about speaking up. If you're afraid to speak up, because sometimes we know that, you can speak up, and just like Thomas Smith and John Carlos and those guys and Colin Kaepernick, they've been put out to pasture. So I understand that. What we can do, how we can impact change, may not put ourselves on the line. I'm very realistic, understanding that we know that's out there. I'm not at the Reginald Center because I spoke up, but again, someone like a Neil Jacobs, someone like a Darnell Williams was there for me to make sure that, if you do good, you're gonna be fine, and I'm fine now. But don't be afraid to speak up. If you can't speak up, then let it be known that something's not right, because, and Darnell, you probably be a better one to quote, but those that remain silent, if you sit back and watch something being silent, you can become part of the problem. So I do want to have some more discussion and questions. Any question, don't feel like you're hurting anyone, anyone's feelings. As I go through the last few weeks, just a few days ago, a friend of mine, for all these years, a white guy, and he says, Keith, I don't know what to say to my Black friends. What do I say to them? I said, just have a conversation, and whatever comes to your heart. He says, well, what do you think about what's going on? I said, you mean the police brutality? He said, no, about the violence. I said, well, I have opinion on both, but I would probably want to hear what you think too, because again, I repeat the same thing. Now, what would bring someone to that point? I have relatives that are in the first responders in New York. One's a detective. in New York. He was told he had to go to the city but again, so I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the fact that, have a friend that was hit with a frozen bottle of frozen bottle of water, as a first responder. That's not right either. So what do we do to get the people that are really angry? I'd much rather us to be more proactive and say, so it doesn't get to that point. And this is a starting point. We're all in position to impact policies and procedures and let folks know that if you don't want to do it alone, then maybe collectively speak up as a group so you can't be singled out. I think that's pretty much I'm open for questions or talk more about what we can go from here.
Thank you, Keith. I think what we'll do is we'll go to AK and then we'll try to gather some questions together. But thank you so much, and to Darnell too, so far, just testifying for us about your truth and how we can share it together. AK, I know you did make it on, and I'm glad that you're here.
Okay, thank you. It was not allowing me to unmute myself. Just first and foremost, I just want to thank Rabbi Keith Stern and Jacobs, and also just Darnell and Keith. And I was thinking a lot about what I wanted to say today. And the first thing that was coming to my mind is like, what can I do to get everybody to understand the situation that's going on? Right. And first and foremost, should say that I'm lucky in some capacity, right? I've been able to travel around the world. I've been lucky to work with big companies like Google, be a professional athlete. But so at the end of the day, it is one particular classifier that's a little bit changed my experience. And one thing I want to do is I know that a lot of people have probably zoomed out at some point because you've been in quarantine for so long. But I want to have us be a little bit active. And I'm going to ask a series of questions. And what I'm going to have you do, all very simple, is all I want you to do is just raise your hand if you identify with anything that I'm about to say. Very simple, okay? The first one is anyone here a parent? If you are, simply raise your hand, right? Mostly everybody. I can only see 25 on my screen, but I'm sure everybody else is also there. Anybody a twin? Any twins? Or triplets? No? Or know any? Okay. What about, is anybody here a veteran? In the military? Or was in the military? Anybody a sports fan? Okay, me too. Anybody traveled over outside of the country? Anyone traveled outside of the country? Okay. And the last one, would anybody consider themselves an artist? Even if it's just stick figures, that counts, that counts. Okay. And the final question is, does anybody identify as Black? Okay, there it goes. Now, the reason I obviously answer that question is that as I go through the list, there's a lot of different similarities, right? I'm a father, I have a 7-year-old daughter, I'm a triplet, I have another person that looks like me, and a girl that kind of looks like me, but I'm obviously the better looking triplet. In addition, my father was a veteran, I'm a sports guy, my little girl's an artist. But it's crazy that we can find so many similarities, but there's one individual qualifier that can actually change that overall experience, right? So for me, yes, I am African-American, I am Black, my parents were born in Nigeria. And I've been having a lot of conversations recently, especially since this has all happened. And especially with people that I used to go to school with. And people have been reaching out to me when I was in in high school, roughly 20 years ago. And I said, well, tell me about your experience at school. And I said, it was a very, very difficult time for me. And like, really? I never thought about that. And that was in terms of points that I experienced were moments of going to the football field and the other athletes would be chanting the N-word as we're getting onto the football field. Or on Christmas, I got a card that had a black man hanging from a tree and it said, Happy Kwanzaa. And it might not also go that I've also been pulled over 70 times, right? Now, with all of those, even though I've been an all-American athlete, I speak all over the world, I don't get to wear those credentials on my chest. Oftentimes, they don't see me for the parent or the twin or the father that's a veteran or the athlete. Sometimes they just see me from the outside. And, you know, I think about this as why this is important. You know, I have a little girl, her name is Haven, and she is my world. And trying to have a conversation with her regarding what's going on has been a little bit difficult. It's been challenging, right? So for her, she wants to be an artist, and she also wants to be a fairy, but those, and, you know, with all of those, it's a challenge, because for what's going on, I can tell her about the what, about what's going on. I can, that's easy. I can tell about the how. I can tell about where this is happening. But the one thing that's been really, really challenging is to tell her the why. Like, I don't know why it's happening because I don't have an answer for it either. And so having this conversation with my little one, and I'll actually just show her, it's just this little girl, my little girl right here, that just says dad. Those experiences that I had when I was growing up was a challenge. That was 20 years ago, but if she's in school, she lives at the school called Phillips Exeter Academy. I used to work at that school. And she has some experiences at school where they, you know, make fun of her hair. And sometimes she says, you know what, Daddy, I don't want to be black, I want to be white. I'm like, well, why is that? She was all like, well, I see bad stuff happening to black people, but I don't see them happening to white. So that's what I want to be. And so for me, I'm like, if this is a child at 7 years old that is able to have some of these experiences, for me, I want her to grow up into a world that's better. You know, oftentimes when I think about myself and my own story, I know, because when we talk about race, sometimes it does make people have a really difficult conversation. And it made me think about, especially my little girl, is this the world I wanted to grow up in? And I was like, no, it's not. And as a female, I have to think about her situation. So for me, I'm 6'3", 220 pounds, I'm a pretty big guy. And when I'm walking down the street, let's say I have to, you know, go to my car in an alleyway or a garage, I don't have to worry about necessarily getting assaulted. I don't got to put keys in my hand. I'm not worried about that. But for my daughter, she may have to worry about that because she's a female. She may have to worry about her safety when she's trying to go someplace because of those situations. Now, if I ask her and I tell her, well, what were you wearing, or what was the situation? You know, in ways what I'm trying to signify to her is, give me reasons why this was justified, or give me reasons why I should not care. But the same thing is happening today, right? As we watch a 46-year-old man gasp for his life and on video as he's just trying to fight to breathe. And if we come in and say, well, was he resisting or did something happen? We often think about, well, are we trying to find reasons to justify that behavior? And I think for all of us, just as much as I want my daughter to be able to walk to her car safely, I think we also want the same for individuals, that we don't want them to die at the hands of the same people that are supposed to protect and serve. See, it's not about a race issue always. It's really, right now, it is about a human rights. It is a human right that we should be able to get to our car safely. It is a right that we should be able to put our name for an application. No matter what your name, you can then be considered. You know, when I think and I continue to move forward, and I know there's a lot of stuff happening, I'll just kind of, you know, agree with Darnell and Keith, is that we're not looking for any type of revenge or any type of handout. It's just consistency. What happens to one person happens to another. Right? If we were to go onto the streets and we were going to, harm somebody else as citizens, the same thing should happen to the same people that are supposed to protect and serve. That's all everyone is asking for, is consistency. And for me, when I think about this moment, as I'm just kind of really just speaking from off the cuff, off the heart, is what happened as we were able to see this video. It allowed people that maybe for the most part might have been just simple onlookers or passerbyers to now be more aware of what's going on. And just because we've brought it up or people have brought this up before, now because they're not able to understand what's going on does not mean or the other conversation that we've had beforehand didn't happen. But now we know and we're aware about some of these stories. So one of the things I did at the beginning of this conversation is put a list together of the things that can kind of connect us, right? We have a long list of who we are, what makes us who we are. I'm a father, and I'm a guy that plays Monopoly. I'm a guy that would like to play Scrabble, but I can't spell very well. But these all make me who I am. And so some of us are moving forward from today about trying to have conversations or thinking about what to say. Maybe what we can do is just change the perspective. Yes, I may not be able to connect with you as a Black or white, but I may be able to connect with you about being a parent, and we can talk about that. Or maybe we can connect on both loving sports. I'm from Denver, so I'm not a Patriots fan, I apologize. But maybe starting those conversations, because if we're not able to see someone, we're not going to be able to hear them. And if we don't hear them, we're not going to care what happens to them, positively or negatively. See, at the end of the day, what we're all asking for, myself included, is consistency, to see me for who I am as a father for an individual that wants his little girl to be the artist and the fairy that she dreams to be. And I know that there's a lot of opportunities that we have in the future about what direction we can go. And there's so many. And all I would say maybe just starting is just to pick a lane, right? It might just be more aware of what's going on, but starting somewhere, even if it's just a conversation. And I think it happens on both sides, because I think the most important story are our own stories. And those are often the times that are getting lost and forgotten. So I'm just AK, just thank you for listening to me. Once again, I'm just AK, a father, a sports guy, a guy that wants to play Scrabble but can't spell, and a father that just wants his daughter to live in a world that I think all of us want our kids to live in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really, I think moving forward, what we're trying to do here is make these connections, connections that are real, and what is the meeting ground upon which we can continue. And I thank all of you for sharing a part of your lives with us, as well as giving us so much to think about moving forward. Them, I would say, on the more controversial end, and I will present it to our three panelists. The first one is, what's your take on the current move for defunding police? So, AK, why don't you start?
Yeah. And I'll give some context. Obviously, the views that I'm sharing are obviously my views. I'm not saying I'm speaking for all Black people around the world. I'm speaking from my own personal point of view on this topic. Now, one of the things I thought was really, really powerful is social media, because we're able to get everybody's able to get their voice heard. But at the same time, it can also cause some challenges, because just like in the 60s, the way that there was a single source of truth, right? Meaning somebody can say, you know, this is part of the movement and this is not part of the movement. But when everybody has a voice, it assumes that this is all parts of the movement. Me personally, I would say, I don't know if anybody's seen the video of Mayor Fry. He was shamed from this protest because he said he would not defund the police. I don't think, on my end, we're not saying to defund the police. What we're saying is, how can we just create some more accountability? How can we create more checks and balances? And how can we create the same rules we would create for citizens and match them with the same of police? I wouldn't say to defund them. I would say, how can we create more accountability, more checks and balances to make sure it's equal for everybody?
Thanks, AK. Darnell.
Well, first and foremost, I'm diametrically opposed to defunding of the police departments across America. I think that there is a misnomer. I served as a fire commissioner in Springfield, and we worked very, very close hand in hand with the police departments. My niece is a police officer in Gary, Indiana. One of my older brothers was a fire lieutenant. And so public service has been part of our family. But the point that they're trying to make is that we need reform, not defunding. Because I believe that there are a lot of police officers out there that really take their jobs very seriously to protect and serve. And they perform a valuable function in terms of deterrent of crime and responding to our society when we need them. There are some people who occupy those positions that do not need to be police officers, and they need to do some self-purging. They know who they are. They need to get them out of their ranks. If we can do that and put mechanisms in place for them to do that, because obviously the police unions are very, very powerful. However, but if somebody is violating the constitutional, civil rights, and human rights of another human being, they don't deserve what I call that lofty position. They have a gun and a badge and authority to protect and serve. So defunding, I don't think is the right direction for us to take. I just think that it's an overreach. And I believe that we need to find better mechanisms in order to execute the displeasure with what we have as an existing system, but defunding it is not the way to go.
Thank you very much. Keith.
I share the same position. I think that's extreme. I think what you need to do to make it more accountable, have a system in place that when they go out of line, that there's some accountability. Because had those videos did not show up, those police reports would have been totally been what to go on. So think about how many George Floyd would there have been if you didn't have the social media and the cameras and so on. So I don't believe I think that's extreme. I don't think that you should defund them at all. But I think that if you want to think about using some resources to put systems in place, controls in place to make them more accountable, then I'm for that. But no, not defunding the police.
Thank you, Keith. Darnell, the second question is, given at this stage, given all that has been going on in our awareness, what do you think the future is about a reparations program for Black America?
Well, I think it's an appropriate question. It is a realistic question, but the practicality of reparations, how do we determine who will get it and what's the mechanism and can we afford it? I think that we have to look at a range of ways. I believe that the real question from my vantage point is that, okay, my grandparents were on the tail end of slavery. My father was born in 1916. And then now it's me and my brothers. So we're 2 generations away from slavery. So how do you compensate all of us for that when we're 2 to 3 generations away from what actually happened to them? But I would say this, if I look at the individuals who are parallel to the enslavers, not the enslavees, how they have benefited financially because of the free labor. I think it was one of the colonels who came up with 40 acres and a mule for every person that was enslaved, but that never happened. And so if I were to equate the 40 acres and a mule in today's dollars, that would probably be a nice check. But how do you connect that check back to the point of when it was promised by the government and never delivered on? And so I think that money is not going to be the only answer to where we are today, Rabbi. Money is not going to be the panacea. I think money will help and money will eliminate poverty. So if we're just focusing in on poverty, how do we eliminate poverty? How do we eliminate poverty conditions? How do we remove discrimination? To me, is more an effective way to go at it. I mean, I have a suggestion. If they were to do reparations, I would not look for a direct cash payout, because I think that is going to be an affront to many Americans. And given what we've just spent on the pandemic across this nation, 41 million people unemployed, having reparations at this time, that will be a deal breaker. But now you can tell me I can get 10, 15, 20 years and don't pay taxes, which would be equivalent to reparations, then that will give me a chance to build up generational wealth. But to ask for a direct check, I don't know if that's the right way to go, even though that I want to see some kind of remedy. I'm not certain a reparations check at this time in our financial history, our economy, where we are, is a prudent way for us to proceed.
Thank you. AK or Keith, anything to add on that?
I think I'll just echo what Darnell said. That would be so complicated and practical that I would probably look at other means of trying to level the playing field. I would say, you know, when you have, and I'm not wearing this 3-Point Foundation shirt just for show. I mean, we need to put some resources into programs that could help people to close the gap, right? Whether it's be financial impact, financial literacy, putting in some bonds to help folks to get to close that gap, people of color. And then I would, honestly, I think that you would have more issues trying to dish out who gets it than getting it passed. Because, you know, you have Blacks from generation. My family, I call myself, as Donna will tell you, a Jamaican, because half of them are from Jamaica, half of them are from here. So then they're going to start to split cut the baby in half to figure out who gets it, you know, how much generations do you have to go back? So I would rather see people of color and folks that's been impacted by that have some programs in place, or some rebate tax credit, or, you know, some programs in place to help to close that gap, that wealth gap.
Thank you.
Rabbi,
Okay.
before you go to the next question, let me just add on to that, if I may. I believe that 10 to 15% of African Americans are doing quite well in spite of the challenges that we are addressing. The 85% that are remaining are those that, in fact, probably could use more strident help around education, financial literacy, health access, and components. And so therefore, it should be more targeted to where folks that really need the assistance to break the cycle of poverty. To me, that is a more effective way to look at it, whether it's reparations or whatever we call it. It's got to be targeted, because there's some people that are doing quite well who are African American. It could be stars, athletes. AK, you can address that from your fellow colleagues, that a lot of them that are not doing well, but the majority part, I don't think Oprah needs any money, if you get my point.
AK, did you want to come in?
Yes. What everybody said is I would touch on, and I mean, I would agree with And, you know, my family, they moved here from Nigeria in 1976. I don't have any lineage within slavery within my background. But I would add within that, the systems due to, we'll say, redlining, that didn't provide individuals access. So because of those situations, now become districts, for example, may not be as well funded. So instead of giving it to individuals, it may actually be giving it to low performing school districts to make sure that these districts and the resources for these children and for these youth can get up to the same level as their more equivalent counterpart within those districts. Within that also include, like I said, financial literacy. I know some of these families are unsure what stocks and investments are, right? Sometimes their only investment might be a savings account or may not even have a debit card. So providing some of these families resources and information about how can you actually grow your wealth outside of just a savings account, and maybe use those money to actually help not just this current generation, but can also last for future generations.
Thank you so much. So from these large policy issues, a really, I think, important and sensitive question. One of our listeners in the Zoom this evening was wondering how to show empathy and concern for Black people that they work with without it feeling like they're singling out this Black person or tokenizing them or somehow, I think, as we talked about before, how, you know, that they don't somehow represent the Black people of America, just one Black man or woman. So I'm wondering, because really, I think it's a very sensitive issue, and we want to get it right. So I'm just curious, what's a way that a white person can connect that will feel not like an affront or offensive or otherwise not welcome?
Can I take a shot at that first? So I've had quite a few of my friends, because I have that relationship that we can talk about things. Ask me, well, what do I say? What do you feel? What do you think? And you know, you've got to be the person, you got a relationship with them to be able to accept what they're saying to you, not be defensive or feel that they're patronizing you, okay? So it's having that conversation. It's just a general conversation. I know there's a lot of stuff going on in Minnesota, Chicago. You know, what's your take on it? I'd like to have a discussion, because if we know the elephant's in the room, okay, are you familiar with what's going on? Are you following it? And just want you to know that I care about what's going on as well. I'm not trying to, just be upfront. I'm not trying to patronize you, or think that you speak for every Black person in America. I just want to hear your views on it. But I do, it concerns me. Share your feelings. It concerns me what's going on. You know, one of my friends says, well, is it just Black on Black? Is it just white on Black crime that people are concerned about? Or do they not care about Black on Black? They told me that there's 3,000 people that killed in the summer in Chicago, which seemed very startling, you know, and so you got to have that conversation and be ready to, you know, you start the conversation that may have some, you know, that's legitimate. It concerns me that some of the people in Chicago are killed and you don't see it on TV every day. It concerns me that certain people are, you know, when someone gets shot in certain parts of Boston, that there is, it's like it rained yesterday. That concerns me. And that's legitimate. We can't stick our head in the sand and think that that's not a reality. Okay, but we got to figure out, go beyond, okay, why that's happening. Not as an excuse, but we got to figure out how we can address that collectively and not be, you know, having a conversation with someone. If they ask you about you know, it's okay to say, you know, get some conversation going and expect that they may have some different views. If they did have some different views, then you give them your opinion and tell them to give it back to you. So I'm very open to, let's talk about it and not be defensive, have the conversation, see how we can collectively address that. When I was at Northeastern, we had I was in government community relations office after my athletic, worked in athletics for a while. And I remember used to tell the president that we, Northeastern's right smack, Mission Hill, Whittier Street projects, 3 different projects right around Northeastern. I remember used to tell the president that people have to go pretty much go buy those projects to come to Northeastern. So we need to utilize our resources to benefit, to help those communities, because we're not gonna be able to put up a wall up around the university. And so we were successful in impacting change in the housing projects around Northeastern. So you got to have that conversation and not go in thinking that this is what they need. You got to go and ask them, what do you need? How can we help you with the resources that we have? How can I help with my position? Or do you need my help? You know, so that's pretty much, have that conversation. Don't be afraid to have that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Any of our other panelists want to speak up to that?
Yeah. So there's 2 pieces to that. I mean, the first one is I do speak. I'm lucky to, but just because I get on stage doesn't mean that I don't get nervous sometimes. And I do feel like it's a two-way street, right? When somebody is reaching out to me to ask me a question, I also need to be aware as a person that it may be a difficult conversation. So I should also make it easier for them if they are trying to say, well, tell me about your experience. And I think at the same time, it's also important for me to ask them their experience as well, right? I think it's a shared conversation. Now, a tip is similar to what I did today, is if I go to somebody and I only see them for their color, yeah, obviously it's gonna cause some resistance because we feel like we're very, very different. Instead, remove that one piece and see them for something different, right? It might just be we both live in the same Boston, we both like sports, we both like something. Like, find a way to start the conversation of commonality rather than differences, right? That might be a tip to have those conversations and be generally open. Ask them straight up, like, just tell me more about this. I'm just trying to learn. I'm honestly trying to learn. And most people should be receptive. Now, another piece that Keith was talking about was, you know, obviously when situations come, they talk about, you know, black on black crime, or what about these 4 officers that were killed during this protest? Why aren't people rioting or protesting those situations? Now, this is a very key thing that I think is very important, especially when they say Black Lives Matter. Now, the question should be, those 4 officers that were shot during the protest, those individuals were arrested. They're arrested, they're prosecuted, so justice was served. When most of these situations that you see where something may have happened, especially with somebody doing something to maybe someone that was white or a police officer, usually they're arrested and convicted. Now for this situation, for these 4 officers to get arrested, a national protest had to happen, right? So that's what we're trying to say. That's the difference between when we say matter. Obviously all lives matter, but when it comes to people of color, sometimes it takes a national protest, it takes video evidence, it takes those information for justice to be served. Like I said, what we're really asking for is consistency, not a handout, not a leverage up, but just consistency. What one side does, we just expect the other side to do as well.
Thank you.
I would just offer the notion is that if you're going to have a conversation with someone, I think it's going to be quite difficult to have this conversation if there's no relationship that has already been established. But if they're a coworker and there's been some ongoing dialogue, I would just offer one comment, that you don't come to the conversation with a preconceived agenda. That you really just saying, listen, if you want to talk to somebody about this topic, I'll let you know that I'm here. I have some thoughts about it, don't know what to say. If I just need to sit here and listen, I will do that for you. But if you want to have a dialogue with somebody about some of the stuff that's happening, I got some concerns and issues as well, and I'll listen to you if you be willing to listen to me, and let's see what we can learn from each other.
Thank you. I am aware of the time, and we have as always, so many questions, and questions that I will take the opportunity to share with our panel through email, and then hopefully opportunity for another chance to talk and to clarify. And again, to thank you so much for this. And Neil, thank you for being the matchmaker to bring us together as you have. Yeah, Darnell.
I just have one parting comment. I know we're trying to wrap up. I have a recommendation for both, not only the three panelists, but also for you, Rabbi, that we try to plan a trip to go to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, that we can do some Black and Jewish fellowship, go down there together. And then I think, because I've been to the Holocaust Museum in DC, so I can talk about the shoes, but we can go to Montgomery and we can talk about the ropes. And so therefore, that would be an opportunity for us to take away from this conversation something that we can do as a joint effort once that the pandemic is moved on, that will give us something to work towards to think about doing that, and we can build from there.
Well, no, actually, you have been the prophet again from your deacon stage, because what I did in fact want to propose is really the last question is on this Zoom tonight. It's very fair to say that there are a number of people that want to be allies, that want to learn more about being anti-racist, what it means to be pro-Black. What does that mean for a person who, I mean, we live pretty sheltered lives, and we all have different perspectives, but we have all been touched and moved by events and by what we've learned. So I think, I know you could probably spin out so many, but if there were just a couple of thoughts you have moving forward that you would, how would you want us to be connecting with the Black community in a way that would be helpful moving forward? How do we do this together? How can we be allies? And I understand as I ask that, and it has been said by Black thinkers for a while now, and it's that it's not like racism is a Black issue that has to be solved. It's a white issue that has to be solved. And part of how we do this is learning what we need to do. So given all that, if you would share just a couple thoughts about what makes sense moving forward. And I think as soon as you suggested this joint trip to Montgomery, the chat room lit up, and I think people are ready to sign up. So that's a fabulous, fabulous idea. But what are a couple of, what are some other thoughts?
I'll yield to my colleagues and let them go first,
Got
because
it.
I've been talking a lot.
AK, you want to go?
You know, obviously there's a lot of different initiatives that you can start one with. The first one is, I think is the most important, is this video allowed individuals to see what's really going on. Oftentimes people have been having these conversations and it was kind of, I'm not gonna say ignored, but it wasn't really taken seriously. So I think right now, one of my biggest things that I would advocate is not to go back to being just passerbyers. And there's obviously more situations that may arise, and now you're able to see it from a different perspective, is one. Two is, I would say, engage in conversations, even if it is uncomfortable, because I think that will also allow you to be able to just have those conversations, see different perspectives. And then maybe three is identify even just one, maybe some program, right? It might be the 3 Point Foundation. It may be organizations within Newton that maybe there's some schools that just need some support, or if you have a particular expertise, maybe it might just be mentoring. and giving some individuals that information that helped you be successful in going to some of those communities and mentoring, supporting, figuring out how you can get these individuals some support. And also I believe is access. I believe access is one of the most important opportunities. So if there's some kids that have never left their environment or people, how can you take them to different environments to see different points of view and access to see about some additional opportunities. But those are just mine.
Okay, thank you so much. Keith?
So I would say too that one is we need to do some more collaboration. I'm not sure if there's a group of rabbis similar to the Black Ministerial Alliance, but you know, when we see things happen collectively, we need to speak up. So they can't be. I know people are worried about being singled out, but if the group of Jewish rabbis and the Black Ministerial Alliance and so forth speaking up on issues, it has impact. The other thing is, I also want to know, you know, get across that I hear people talk about Black Lives Matter or White Lives Matter too. Yes, it does. And it's not either or, it's both. But, you know, to get to the point where they have to have a campaign to say Black Lives Matter, as AK pointed out, you know, it took videos and nation outcry to get these guys just arrested, not charged. And as you know, very optimistic as I am, and folks that know will tell you I'm an optimist, that those officers will not be prosecuted because 12 jurors will not find them guilty in the communities that they're in, and that's pretty sad. But that's what I believe. I hope I'm wrong, but it shouldn't take that. So, but if more folks are speaking up collectively, then we could have an impact, some positive change on that. The other thing is we need also to be, you know, accountable. I'm not speaking for all Blacks. I'm not speaking for everyone, but we need to be accountable. You know, whether it's giving back to our kids so they understand what they need to do. Our communities, we need to give back and make sure that folks are accountable and that they're, you know, it's not a giveaway. It's not, you know, handout. It's having a positive impact on people's lives, because I know that I'm pretty somewhat sheltered. I wouldn't say sheltered, but yeah, I've had a different experience than most of what I see in my work. You know, when I was at the Reginald Lewis Center, see someone come in, they got 5 kids and nothing to eat, and they didn't want to come. They wanted us to slip the food out the back because they're too embarrassed to come and ask for food. You know, that for me was, wow, I've been really sheltered and protected. You know, so there are some real things that the resources that we have, we can give back. You know, so there's some things that we need to do. But again, pro-Black does not mean anti-anything. It's, and all lives matter. But that's not to come back to say, well, you know, all lives matter. It's, you know, it does. We got to look at what got folks to have that position, that because they got an impression that it didn't matter. So we need to really collectively give back to those campaigns.
Thank you so much.
Darnell. My final comments are going to center around, I want to say, first of all, to AK and to Keith, thank you, brothers, for sharing your heartfelt thoughts about where we are and where we need to go, and collaboration with the Jewish community. I don't take this conversation lightly. But I want us to think about is that we must take responsibility for the well-being of others. And I would close that by saying even strangers. So the first thing that I would offer as a thing that we could do is that we can really strengthen the civilian review boards by making sure that they have subpoena power. That's one. I emailed Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley this morning thinking of something on this line, that there would be some kind of annual recognition of George Floyd so that we will use this moment as a reflection, not as a holiday, but a way of us to really, because if once the momentum dies down and the protests are over, how do we make sure that we stay on task? And so I sent it to her to reach out to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, that they could file a joint bill, that they could come up with some way that at a national level, that we will keep George Floyd's life and his legacy, not how he died, in the forefront of our minds, so that we would in fact be able to continue to build towards where we're trying to go. And if locally, if we were to do something, I would call it, not call it anything, but I would say, if we could figure out a way to how we break the cycle of poverty for those that are impacted, the George Floyd Empowerment Initiative, where we focus in on financial literacy, specifically helping people improve their credit scores or improve reducing their debt, how to become less consumer oriented or investment and savings, something that I don't have all the answers, but that's the direction I would offer. So George Floyd's name doesn't as hot for the moment, but gives it some legitimacy and continuity, but at the same time build on it. And the Civilian Review Board is very much a strong component, and also what I call a body cams for every police officer in this region, in the city of Boston. I'll stop there, but those are my thoughts. I'm humbly grateful to have this opportunity to speak to you this evening.
Thank you all so much. And a promise to you, our speakers, and to the congregation and friends of the congregation who are listening this evening. We've got work to do. And the accompanying issue of COVID-19 and how it makes building coalitions particularly difficult at this time is no excuse for inaction. And I think in the weeks and months ahead, what we'll be doing is really attempting to create something that we don't have yet, something our congregation needs to put together. And we are lucky to have people who can guide us in that regard. And I look forward to the work, to identifying it. I think that Ege said, pick a lane. What we want to do is embrace as much as possible, but the fact is that we will do the most good as a community to figure out what's the entry point and how can we make an impact in that place. Part of it also is education, and we will look forward to being able to learn more and more about the Black experience in this country, in Boston, in Newton, in Brookline, in Needham, to just, we have to educate ourselves, and that's another pledge that I make. Thank all of you again so much for attending this evening's Zoom. We will pass forward the questions we didn't get answered. We will put out some information for you, and stay tuned. And blessings, everyone. Stay healthy.
Rabbi, and if there's any potential feedback that you get from the congregants, would you please share that with both AK and Keith and I?
Absolutely will. That's a promise.
Okay. Becky and Eileen, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being with us
Neil.
tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Darnell.
Neil, thank you.
Okay, nice seeing you.
Okay, good to see you guys.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for
Thank you.
listening.